She left her apartment at 6:47 in the morning to buy flowers for her own surprise birthday party. Her car was found 3 hours later in a grocery store parking lot. Engine still running, driver's door wide open, and a receipt on the seat, time-stamped 7:03 a.m. Emma Whitmore would never blow out her 24 candles. The receipt told a simple story. Milk, bread, a bouquet of sunflowers. Total, $14.37. Paid in cash. The cashier would later tell police that Emma seemed happy that morning, humming something under her breath as she counted out the bills. She remembered because Emma smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and said, "Have a beautiful day," before turning toward the automatic doors. It was 7:02 a.m. 60 seconds later, according to the timestamp, something went catastrophically wrong. The parking lot surveillance camera had been broken for 6 weeks. The store manager, a man named Derek Morrison, had submitted 3 work orders to corporate, but budget constraints meant repairs were perpetually delayed. On October 12, 1996, that broken camera became the difference between a mystery and a solution. Without it, there was no footage of Emma loading her groceries, no image of who approached her, no record of the moment a young woman vanished in broad daylight from a place where dozens of people should have seen something. But nobody did. The first person to notice the abandoned vehicle was Linda Chen, a 46-year-old dental hygienist arriving for her own shopping trip at 9:43 a.m. She parked 2 spaces away and immediately felt something was off. The engine was running. She could hear it, a steady idle that seemed too loud in the morning stillness. The driver's door hung open at an odd angle, not fully extended but not closed either, as if someone had gotten out in a hurry and simply forgot to shut it behind them. Linda approached slowly, her keys clutched between her fingers in that defensive grip women learn young and never forget. The interior was unremarkable at first glance. A purple jacket draped across the passenger seat. A thermos in the cup holder, still warm when police tested it later. The receipt on the driver's seat, the edges already curling in the October chill. And on the dashboard, face down, a Polaroid camera, the kind that spits out instant photos. Beloved by people who couldn't wait for drugstore development. Emma had been one of those people. She documented everything. Her students, her cat, sunsets over Lake Champlain, the mundane magic of everyday life. Linda didn't touch anything. She'd watched enough news to know better. Instead, she walked quickly back to her own car and drove to the payphone at the edge of the parking lot. 911. She gave the address, described what she'd found, and waited. Within 8 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. Within 20, the parking lot was cordoned off with yellow tape that snapped and twisted in the wind. Within an hour, Emma's roommate Jessica was being interviewed, her face pale, her hands shaking as she tried to explain that Emma had only gone out for flowers, that she'd be right back, that this didn't make any sense. The Polaroid camera became evidence item number 7. When Detective Raymond Foster carefully lifted it from the dashboard, wearing latex gloves that squeaked against the plastic, he noticed something. The photo counter showed 1 picture had been taken since the last time the camera was loaded. Modern Polaroid cameras ejected photos automatically, but there was no photo in the tray, no photo on the passenger seat or the floor. Someone had taken a picture that morning, and someone had taken that picture with them. What did Emma photograph at 7:03 a.m.? Was it something innocuous? A shot of the flowers she'd just bought? Or did she, in her last moment of freedom, manage to capture the face of the person who was about to destroy everything? That question would haunt investigators for 18 years. The answer, when it finally came, would be even worse than anyone imagined. Emma Whitmore was born on October 12, 1972, in Burlington, Vermont, during an early snowstorm that knocked out power to half the city. Her mother, Patricia, would later say that Emma came into the world fighting, arriving 3 weeks early and hollering loud enough to be heard through the hospital's backup generator. From the beginning, Emma was someone who made her presence known. Growing up, Emma was the kind of child teachers loved and remembered years later. Bright, curious, endlessly enthusiastic about learning. She read voraciously, burning through every book in the children's section of the Burlington Public Library by age 12. Her favorite subjects were English and art, though she struggled with mathematics in a way that frustrated her precisely because she was used to excelling at everything she tried. High school brought the typical challenges. Emma wasn't part of the popular crowd, but she wasn't an outcast either. She existed in that comfortable middle ground of students who had close friends, participated in activities, and graduated without particular drama. She dated occasionally, nothing serious. Her focus was always on her future, on the plans she was making for a life that felt full of possibility. It was during her junior year that Emma decided she wanted to teach. The realization came during a volunteer tutoring session with elementary students. She'd been helping a second grader named Marcus who struggled with reading, and after weeks of patient work, he'd finally managed to read an entire page without help. The joy on his face, the pride in his accomplishment, the way he looked at Emma like she'd given him something precious. That moment changed everything. Emma went home that night and told her parents she knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life. The University of Vermont accepted her into their elementary education program in 1990. Emma threw herself into her studies with characteristic intensity. She wasn't just learning how to teach, she was learning how to reach children, how to make education feel like adventure rather than obligation. Her student teaching placement in her senior year confirmed what she already knew. Teaching wasn't just a job for Emma, it was a calling. She graduated in May of 1994 with honors and immediately began applying for teaching positions. The job market was competitive, but Emma's enthusiasm and genuine love for children shone through in interviews. When Riverside Elementary School in Whitmore offered her a second-grade position, she accepted without hesitation. The salary was modest, $32,000 a year, but Emma didn't care about money. She cared about making a difference. Her first day of teaching was September 5, 1994. 21 7-year-olds sat in her classroom, watching with that peculiar mix of curiosity and judgment that children excel at. Emma's hands shook as she introduced herself, but her voice remained steady. She told them she was new at this, that they'd learn together, that mistakes were how people grew. By the end of that first day, she knew she'd found her place in the world. The 2 years that followed were everything Emma had hoped for and more. Her students loved her. Parents praised her at conferences. Her principal, Dr. Margaret Lawson, called her a natural. Emma had a gift for making every child feel seen, for recognizing that the fidgety boy needed movement to focus, and the shy girl needed extra encouragement to speak up. She didn't just teach reading and mathematics. She taught children how to believe in themselves. Outside of school, Emma built a life in Whitmore. She shared a small apartment with Jessica Lambert, a physical therapist she'd met through mutual friends. The two women became close, the kind of friends who could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours about nothing in particular. Emma adopted a cat from the local shelter, an orange tabby she named Pumpkin. She joined a book club at the library. She became a regular at Pete's Diner, where she'd grade papers over coffee that was too strong, but somehow exactly what she needed. Emma dated occasionally, but nothing serious developed. She told Jessica she was waiting for someone who made her feel the way books made her feel. Transported, engaged, fully present. Jessica would laugh and tell Emma her standards were impossibly high, but Emma refused to settle. She was 24 years old. She had time, or so she believed. October of 1996 brought Emma's 24th birthday. Her friends, led by Jessica, planned a surprise party for Saturday evening, October 12th. Emma knew something was being planned. She'd overheard a suspiciously hushed phone conversation. But she played along because that's who she was. Someone who let other people have their joy, even when it came at the expense of genuine surprise. Friday night, the evening before her disappearance, Emma stayed late at school finishing lesson plans. She wanted the following week's materials prepared so she could enjoy her birthday weekend without work hanging over her. When she finally left Riverside Elementary at 6:30 p.m., the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emma stood in the parking lot for a moment, just watching the colors fade, thinking about how lucky she was. Good job, good friends, good life. Everything she'd worked for had come together exactly as she'd hoped. She had no way of knowing she had less than 13 waking hours left to live. Saturday morning, Emma woke early, as was her habit. She planned to run to SaveMart for a few groceries. Milk, bread, and flowers for the apartment. The party was that evening, and while her friends would bring everything needed, Emma wanted fresh flowers on display. She loved sunflowers, their bright yellow faces that always turned toward the sun. They made her happy in a way she couldn't quite articulate, something about their insistent cheerfulness even in autumn. She dressed casually. Sweatpants and a University of Vermont hoodie. Sneakers she didn't bother tying properly. Hair pulled into a messy ponytail. No makeup. She was going to a grocery store, not a fashion show. She grabbed her wallet, left her purse at home, and headed out the door at 6:47 a.m. Jessica, meditating in her bedroom, heard the door close. She glanced at her clock and made a mental note. Emma had left on time for her Saturday morning grocery run. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Except it wasn't. Emma's car, a 1989 Honda Accord with faded blue paint and a temperamental transmission, sat in the apartment building's parking lot. She'd bought it used 3 years earlier for $2,800, and it had served her well despite its age and occasional mechanical complaints. The engine caught on the second try that morning, coughing once before settling into its familiar rough idle. The drive to SaveMart took 9 minutes. Emma knew the route by heart. Left out of the apartment complex, right on Maple Street, straight through 2 traffic lights, left on Commerce Drive. At 6:56 a.m. on a Saturday morning, traffic was minimal. A few early risers heading to work, a truck making deliveries, the ordinary flow of a small town waking up. SaveMart occupied the end unit of a strip mall that also housed a laundromat, a video rental store, and a Chinese restaurant Emma had tried once and never returned to. The grocery store had been a staple of Whitmore for 15 years, locally owned until 1993 when it was purchased by a regional chain. The new owners had promised improvements, but delivered mostly cosmetic changes and cost-cutting measures that frustrated both employees and customers. Emma parked in the 3rd row, not hunting for the closest spot, but simply taking the first available space she saw. It was a habit her father had instilled in her. Park and walk. Don't waste time circling for a spot 10 feet closer. She turned off the engine, grabbed her wallet from the console, and headed toward the store entrance. Inside, SaveMart was brightly lit and nearly empty. The early morning shift belonged to stock clerks restocking shelves and a handful of customers who preferred shopping before crowds arrived. Emma grabbed a cart from the corral near the entrance and began her quick shopping trip. Dairy section first, 1 gallon of 2% milk. Then to the bread aisle, multigrain, store brand. Finally, toward the floral section near produce. The flowers were displayed in white buckets, stems cut to uniform lengths, water keeping them fresh. Emma's choices were limited this late in the season. Carnations, which felt too formal. Roses, which seemed wrong for decorating your own apartment. And sunflowers, which were perfect. She selected a bouquet with 6 blooms, their faces wide and cheerful. Exactly the kind of flowers that made her smile. At the checkout, Kelly Morrison rang up Emma's purchases. Kelly was 26 years old, working the early shift because it paid an extra $1 an hour. She'd been at SaveMart for 3 years and had seen Emma shopping there dozens of times. Kelly would later tell police that Emma seemed happy that morning, humming something Kelly couldn't quite identify. When Emma paid with a $20 bill and received her change, she smiled at Kelly. Really smiled. Not the automatic courtesy smile most customers used, and said, "Have a beautiful day." Kelly remembered that specifically because genuine kindness was rare at 6 in the morning. Most people were barely functional, grunting responses to her greetings, focused only on getting their groceries and leaving. Emma's cheerfulness stood out. It was 7:02 a.m. when Emma gathered her bag and turned toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open with their characteristic whoosh. Emma stepped into the October morning, pushing her cart across the parking lot toward her Honda. The air was cold but not bitter, the kind of autumn chill that required a jacket, but felt refreshing rather than uncomfortable. Emma loaded her groceries into the back seat, placing the sunflowers last so they wouldn't get crushed. This is where the timeline becomes crucial and deeply uncertain. Emma's car was found abandoned at 9:43 a.m., engine still running, door open. But witnesses would later come forward with conflicting accounts of when they'd seen the vehicle. One claimed to have noticed it as early as 8:15, though they couldn't be certain. Another remembered walking past around 9 and thinking it was odd that a car was running with no one inside. But they'd assumed someone was nearby and would return shortly. What happened in those moments between 7:03 a.m., when Emma left SaveMart with her groceries, and whenever her car was abandoned? The police investigation would eventually reconstruct a timeline based on Derek Morrison's confession, forensic evidence, and witness statements. Emma had loaded her groceries, placed the sunflowers in the back seat, and was about to get into her car when she was approached. The person approaching her was familiar enough not to trigger immediate alarm. A SaveMart employee? Someone she'd seen before. Someone who seemed harmless. Derek Morrison, the store manager, was supposed to be inside working, but he'd taken an early lunch break. 30 minutes he wasn't technically entitled to, but claimed as manager's privilege. He'd been watching Emma through the store windows, had seen her check out, had known this was his opportunity. He'd been fixated on her for months, mistaking her politeness for romantic interest, building elaborate fantasies about a relationship that existed only in his delusional mind. When Morrison approached Emma in the parking lot, he seemed friendly, casual. He mentioned it was her birthday, something Kelly had told him. He asked if she had plans, if she was celebrating. Emma, ever polite, answered briefly. Yes, friends were planning something. Yes, she was looking forward to it. She wasn't rude, but she also wasn't encouraging. She was simply trying to end the conversation so she could leave. But Morrison didn't read her body language correctly. Or perhaps he did, and chose to ignore it. He asked if she'd like to have dinner sometime, with him. The question hung in the air for a moment, awkward and inappropriate. Emma's response was kind but firm. She was flattered, but she wasn't interested. She wished him well and moved to get into her car. That rejection, simple, polite, definitive, shattered something in Morrison's mind. All his fantasies, all his certainty that she felt the same connection he did, collapsed in an instant. Worse, it forced him to confront reality. He was a 44-year-old, married man who'd built an entire imaginary relationship with a customer half his age, who'd only ever been polite to him. The humiliation morphed instantly into rage. What happened next occurred quickly, a cascade of bad decisions made in moments of panic. Morrison grabbed Emma's arm as she tried to get into her car. Emma pulled away, her self-defense training kicking in automatically. Her hand reached for her dashboard for the Polaroid camera she kept there, and she took a photograph. The flash went off. The camera ejected the developing picture. Morrison understood immediately what that photograph meant. Evidence. Proof of his approach, his grab, his aggression. He snatched the Polaroid from Emma's hand, but Emma was already screaming, already trying to get into her car, already attracting attention, or at least potentially attracting attention. Morrison panicked completely. He covered her mouth with his hand, pulled her away from her vehicle, told her to calm down, insisted he wouldn't hurt her, promised everything would be fine if she'd just be quiet and listen. But Emma wasn't calm, and Morrison's panic deepened with every passing second. He dragged her toward his own car, parked in the employee section of the lot. He shoved her into the passenger seat and activated the child locks, trapping her inside. Then he got in the driver's side and drove away, leaving Emma's Honda running, door open, groceries spoiling, sunflowers wilting. By the time anyone noticed the abandoned vehicle 2 hours and 40 minutes later, Emma was already dead in the woods 40 miles away, and Derek Morrison had returned to SaveMart to finish his shift as if nothing had happened. The parking lot where this occurred was large enough that the handful of other early morning shoppers were too far away to witness what happened. The broken security camera meant no footage captured the abduction. Emma's screams, if anyone heard them, were dismissed as kids playing, or perhaps not registered consciously at all. In a matter of minutes, in broad daylight, in a public place, Emma Whitmore was taken. Her car sat running in that parking lot, slowly draining its fuel, until 9:43 a.m. when Linda Chen found it. By then the trail was cold. The critical window for finding Emma alive had closed, and Derek Morrison, having buried her body in remote forest, was back at work, answering police questions about whether he'd seen anything suspicious that morning. Linda Chen's 911 call came in at 9:46 a.m. The Whitmore Police Department dispatcher, Francis Burke, took the information with practiced calm. Abandoned vehicle. Engine running, door open, SaveMart parking lot. 2 patrol cars were dispatched immediately. Officers Michael Zhang and Jennifer Torres arrived at 9:54 a.m. Zhang was the first to approach the Honda. He noted the warm engine. The position of the driver's seat pushed back farther than seemed right for Emma's height. The purple jacket folded neatly on the passenger seat. The groceries sat in a SaveMart bag on the back seat floor. The sunflowers lay across the back seat, their stems still wrapped in paper, their yellow faces already beginning to droop. Torres began documenting everything with her personal camera, a habit her training officer had instilled. Photograph first, investigate second, because you never know what details will matter later. She shot the receipt on the driver's seat, time-stamped 7:03 a.m. She photographed the thermos in the cup holder, still radiating faint warmth. She captured the Polaroid camera on the dashboard, its presence unremarkable at first, until Zhang noticed the photo counter. 1 picture taken. No picture found. At 10:07 a.m., Detective Raymond Foster arrived. Foster was 48 years old, a detective for 12 years. The kind of cop who'd seen enough to be cautious about assumptions, but not so much that he'd stopped caring. He examined the vehicle with methodical thoroughness, noting everything that seemed significant and several things that didn't seem significant but might become so later. The key question was whether this represented a voluntary abandonment or something more sinister. Young woman leaves store, gets into car, drives away, that would be normal. But Emma hadn't driven away. Her car sat in the same space where she'd parked it. So either she'd left the parking lot in another vehicle voluntarily, or something had prevented her from leaving in her own car. Neither scenario was good, but the second was far worse. At 10:23 a.m., Torres connected with Jessica Lambert, Emma's roommate. The call started routine and descended rapidly into nightmare. Jessica had last seen Emma that morning around 6:45. Emma had gone to buy groceries. She should have been back an hour ago. No, nothing was wrong. No, Emma had no reason to leave voluntarily. Yes, Jessica was certain something terrible had happened. Jessica arrived at SaveMart 15 minutes later, driving too fast, her face pale with fear that was rapidly becoming certainty. Foster interviewed her in his vehicle, trying to extract useful information while managing her growing panic. Jessica provided Emma's full description, what she'd been wearing, a recent photograph from her wallet. She explained about the surprise party planned for that evening, how Emma had only needed a few items, how this made absolutely no sense. "Does Emma have any enemies?" Foster asked. "No, everyone loves Emma. She's a teacher. The kids adore her. Parents request her specifically. She doesn't have enemies? Boyfriend? Ex-boyfriend?" "No current boyfriend. She dated someone briefly in college, but nothing recent. She was focusing on her career." Foster made notes. No obvious suspect. No apparent motive. A woman who by all accounts was well-liked, responsible, and had no reason whatsoever to disappear voluntarily. The pieces weren't adding up to anything good. By 11 a.m., Emma's parents had been notified. Richard and Patricia Whitmore, enjoying what should have been a peaceful Saturday morning in Burlington, received a phone call that would shatter their world. Their daughter was missing. Her car had been found abandoned. Police were investigating. Could they come to Whitmore immediately? The drive from Burlington to Whitmore normally took 45 minutes. Richard made it in 30, running 2 red lights and exceeding the speed limit by 20 miles per hour. A state trooper who clocked him speeding chose not to stop him, recognizing the license plate from the Bolo alert that had just gone out. Emma Whitmore, missing from Whitmore, parents en route from Burlington. Patricia and Richard arrived at the police station at noon, looking like they'd aged a decade in the past hour. Foster met with them in an interview room, the one usually reserved for witnesses rather than suspects, and delivered what little information existed. The vehicle found, Emma not. No signs of violence, but also no indication she'd left willingly. "What are you doing to find her?" Patricia asked, her voice shaking but her gaze steady. Foster explained the immediate steps. Officers canvassing the area, interviewing store employees, checking with local hospitals and shelters. They were treating this as a missing person case with suspicious circumstances, which meant mobilizing resources typically reserved for active crimes. "Suspicious circumstances," Richard repeated, the phrase seeming inadequate to the fear consuming him. "My daughter is missing. That's more than suspicious." Foster couldn't argue with that assessment. By 1 p.m., the search had officially begun. Patrol officers fanned out across Whitmore, visiting businesses along Emma's route from apartment to SaveMart, showing her photograph, asking if anyone had seen her that morning. The SaveMart manager, Derek Morrison, was interviewed. He'd been in his office doing paperwork, he explained, and hadn't seen Emma shopping. He expressed concern about the broken security cameras, saying if they'd been working, maybe there'd be footage showing what happened. Kelly Morrison, Derek's sister-in-law and the cashier who'd served Emma, was interviewed at 2:15 p.m. She confirmed Emma had seemed fine, happy even, when checking out. No, Kelly hadn't seen where Emma went after leaving. No, she hadn't noticed anyone following Emma or anyone suspicious in the store. It had been a normal morning right up until police arrived asking questions about an abandoned car. By late afternoon, local media had picked up the story. "Local teacher missing, car found abandoned at SaveMart," ran as the lead story on the evening news. Emma's face appeared on television screens across central Vermont, her senior picture from college, showing a young woman with a bright smile and her whole life ahead of her. The Whitmore Fire Department organized a volunteer search party for Sunday morning. Every available off-duty officer was called in. The Vermont State Police offered assistance. Search and rescue teams from neighboring counties prepared to deploy. But as Saturday evening approached and darkness fell, Emma had been missing for 12 hours, and the chances of finding her alive diminished with every passing minute. Patricia and Richard checked into a motel in Whitmore, unable to bear returning to Burlington while Emma remained missing. Jessica sat in the apartment they'd shared, surrounded by decorations for a party that would never happen, and called everyone who'd been invited to cancel. 23 people who should have been celebrating Emma's birthday instead learned she was missing, and the joy they'd planned to create transformed instantly into fear they couldn't articulate. The sunflowers Emma had bought that morning were removed from her car as evidence, bagged and tagged, their bright yellow faces mocking the darkness of the situation. By midnight, they were already wilting, their stems drooping, their petals losing their cheerful color. By Sunday morning, they would be dead. Emma had been missing for 18 hours. Detective Raymond Foster had worked enough missing person cases to know the grim statistics. When someone vanishes, the first 48 hours are critical. If they're not found in that window, the chances of finding them alive drop precipitously. By Monday morning, October 14th, 48 hours had passed since Emma bought sunflowers for her birthday party. Foster's optimism was fading rapidly. The volunteer search party that Sunday had been extensive. 87 people spread across Whitmore, walking through parks, checking wooded areas, knocking on doors, showing Emma's photograph. The Whitmore Fire Department coordinated the effort with military precision, dividing the town into grid sections, ensuring every area received thorough attention. They found nothing. No trace of Emma, no witnesses who'd seen anything suspicious, no leads that went anywhere productive. Foster began the process of investigating everyone close to Emma, starting with those who had proximity and opportunity. Jessica Lambert was easy to eliminate. She'd been home during the critical window, confirmed by a neighbor who'd heard music playing from the apartment around 7:30 a.m. Her distress was genuine, her cooperation complete, and she had no conceivable motive. Foster spent 2 hours interviewing her anyway, asking about Emma's habits, her schedule, her social circle, her potential enemies. Who would want to hurt Emma? Foster asked for the third time, approaching the question from a different angle. I keep telling you, nobody, Jessica insisted. Emma didn't make enemies. She was kind to everyone. Her students loved her. Parents loved her. Other teachers loved her. The cashier at SaveMart remembered her specifically because she was nice. That's who Emma was. Patricia and Richard Whitmore were similarly easy to eliminate. They'd been in Burlington during Emma's disappearance, a fact confirmed by multiple witnesses and phone records. Their grief was obviously genuine, the kind of raw pain that can't be fabricated. Foster interviewed them extensively anyway, asking about Emma's childhood, her relationships, whether she'd seemed troubled recently. They painted a picture of an unremarkably happy daughter. Close family relationships, no financial troubles, no mental health issues, nothing suggesting she'd disappear voluntarily. The investigation expanded to SaveMart employees. Foster interviewed every person who'd been working that Saturday morning. Derek Morrison, the store manager, had been in his office during the critical period, confirmed by 2 stock clerks who'd needed his signature on delivery paperwork. He seemed genuinely troubled by Emma's disappearance, repeatedly expressing frustration that the broken security cameras meant no footage of what had happened in the parking lot. Kelly Morrison, Derek's sister-in-law, had no useful information beyond what she'd already provided. She'd served Emma at 7:02 a.m., watched her leave at 7:03, and seen nothing suspicious. Other employees had similar stories. They'd been inside working, focused on their tasks, unaware anything was wrong until police arrived hours later. Foster ran background checks on everyone who'd had any connection to Emma. The results came back clean. No criminal records among her friends, no red flags among SaveMart employees, no obvious suspects emerging from the investigation. The case was frustrating in the way cold cases often are. Not from lack of effort, but from absence of evidence. One potential lead emerged Tuesday afternoon. A witness named Roger Fleming, a truck driver, claimed to have seen Emma's Honda at a rest stop on Route 7 around 8 a.m. Saturday. The car had been parked oddly, taking up 2 spaces, and Fleming had noticed it specifically because of that. He couldn't say definitively it was Emma's car, but the description matched. Faded blue Accord, Vermont plates, roughly the right year. Foster drove to the rest stop, 30 miles from SaveMart. If Emma's car had been there at 8 a.m., it raised questions about the timeline. Had someone driven it there after taking Emma? If so, why? And how had the car ended up back at SaveMart where it was found hours later? The rest stop had security cameras, but they recorded on a 72-hour loop. By the time Foster checked, Saturday morning's footage had been overwritten. Another dead end. By Wednesday, Emma had been missing for 4 days. The investigation had generated hundreds of pages of reports, dozens of interviews, and exactly 0 useful leads. Foster sat at his desk, reviewing everything again, looking for the detail he'd missed, the connection he'd failed to make. Nothing jumped out. Emma had gone to buy groceries and vanished as if she'd never existed. The missing Polaroid photograph haunted Foster. Someone had taken that picture. Someone had that photograph. If he could find it, maybe everything else would make sense. But how do you find a single photograph when you don't know who took it, don't know what it depicts, and don't even know where to begin looking? Thursday brought another false lead. A teenager claimed to have seen Emma at a mall in Rutland, 35 miles away. Foster dispatched officers to check. The woman wasn't Emma, merely someone with similar hair and build. The teenager had been certain, absolutely convinced, but entirely wrong. It was the beginning of a pattern that would plague the investigation. People seeing Emma everywhere because they wanted her to be alive, their hope overriding their judgment. On Friday, 1 week after Emma's disappearance, Foster held a press conference. He stood at a podium in the police station's community room, cameras pointed at him, reporters holding microphones forward, and delivered an update that contained no real news. Emma was still missing. The investigation was ongoing. Anyone with information should contact the police immediately. Patricia and Richard Whitmore attended the press conference. Sitting in the front row, their presence a silent plea for someone, anyone, to come forward with information. After Foster finished, Patricia approached the podium. The cameras captured everything. Her trembling hands, her red-rimmed eyes, her voice that shook but remained audible. "I'm speaking directly to whoever took my daughter," Patricia began. "I don't know why you did this. I don't know what Emma did to make you hurt her, but I'm begging you as a mother, please let us bring her home. Even if the worst has happened, we need to bury her properly. We need to say goodbye. Please, give us that much." The plea was broadcast on every news station in Vermont. It generated 400 new tips, none of which led anywhere productive. But Patricia's acknowledgement of the worst, her public acceptance that Emma was probably dead, marked a turning point. Until then, everyone had maintained hope, however unrealistic. Patricia's words forced the community to confront what most had been avoiding. Emma wasn't coming home alive. By the end of October, 2 weeks after Emma vanished, the investigation had stalled completely. Foster continued working the case, following up on tips, re-interviewing witnesses, reviewing evidence. But without new information, without a breakthrough, the case was going cold. Emma's apartment remained exactly as she'd left it. Jessica couldn't bring herself to disturb Emma's room, to pack up her belongings, to acknowledge that Emma wouldn't be returning. Emma's cat, Pumpkin, stopped eating properly. The veterinarian said it was grief. Jessica didn't disagree. Riverside Elementary held a vigil. 200 people gathered in the gymnasium, standing under fluorescent lights that seemed too bright for the occasion, and sang Amazing Grace, because it was Patricia's favorite hymn. Emma's students, those 21 second graders who'd made her birthday cards, sat in the front row with their parents. Some cried. Others stared blankly, too young to fully understand that their teacher was gone. Derek Morrison attended the vigil. He stood at the back, looking uncomfortable, crying openly. Kelly Morrison attended with her husband, both of them visibly distraught. Nobody suspected Derek Morrison of anything except being a concerned community member affected by a local tragedy. And Derek Morrison, knowing exactly what he'd done, knowing where Emma's body lay buried in forest 40 miles away, accepted condolences from people who had no idea they were comforting a murderer. 1997 brought no answers. Patricia and Richard Whitmore returned to Burlington, unable to afford the motel indefinitely. Jessica moved to Boston, leaving behind the apartment where every corner reminded her of Emma. She took Pumpkin with her, unable to abandon Emma's cat, even though his presence brought constant heartache. Detective Foster worked other cases. Whitmore wasn't a high-crime town, but crime occurred nonetheless. Domestic disturbances, theft, drug arrests, these cases demanded attention, pushed Emma's file farther back on Foster's desk, though he never officially closed it. Once a month, he'd pull out the folder and read through everything again, hoping fresh eyes would reveal something previously missed. They never did. The first anniversary vigil in 1998 drew 30 people, far fewer than the original memorial. The media covered it briefly, a 3-minute segment on the evening news. But the story had lost its urgency. 1 year missing meant Emma was almost certainly dead. The window for rescue had closed. What remained was the slow, grinding question of whether her body would ever be found. In 2000, Foster submitted evidence from Emma's car for DNA reprocessing. Technology had advanced significantly, and the thermos that contained Emma's fingerprints also held partial prints from an unknown male. Foster hoped the expanded CODIS database, the FBI's combined DNA index system, might produce a match. It didn't. The unknown fingerprints belonged to someone with no criminal record, someone who'd never been arrested or printed for any reason. Jessica married in 2001. Patricia and Richard attended the wedding, smiled at appropriate moments, and left early. Watching Emma's best friend Mary felt like witnessing Emma's stolen future play out through someone else's life. Detective Foster retired in 2007. At his retirement party, someone asked what case haunted him most. Foster didn't hesitate. Emma Whitmore, 24-year-old teacher who went to buy flowers and never came home. I worked that case for 11 years and never got close to solving it. That one's gonna follow me to my grave. Before leaving, Foster met with Detective Warren Reynolds, his replacement. Reynolds was 38, ambitious, thorough. Foster handed him a box containing Emma's complete case file. Every report, every interview, every photograph. "I promised her parents I'd never give up," Foster said. "I'm breaking that promise by retiring, but maybe you can keep it for me." Reynolds accepted the responsibility. He spent his first week reviewing the file, familiarizing himself with every detail. The case fascinated him. Not the lurid fascination of true crime enthusiasts, but the professional interest of someone who believed every victim deserved justice. The years passed. Patricia and Richard aged rapidly, grief taking its physical toll. Richard died in 2013 from a heart attack, and Patricia would tell anyone who asked that he'd died of a broken heart, that Emma's disappearance had killed him as surely as any physical ailment. Patricia moved into a retirement community, selling the house where Emma had grown up. She died in 2019, 4 years after Emma's case was finally solved. She lived long enough to see Derek Morrison imprisoned, long enough to bury Emma properly, but not long enough to heal from wounds that had bled for 23 years. Jessica's daughter, born in 2002, was named Emma. Patricia cried when she heard, saying she would have loved that. Young Emma would grow up hearing stories about her namesake, about the friend her mother had loved, about the woman who vanished buying flowers, and Derek Morrison, the SaveMart manager who'd murdered Emma and buried her in remote forest, went about his life. He moved to New Hampshire in 2003, took a similar management position at a different grocery chain. He divorced his wife in 2005. She'd finally left him, though she never knew why he'd become so distant, so strange. After 1996, Morrison kept a journal, begun in 1994 and continuing through 2012. He wrote about Emma, though he never used her name. He called her the teacher, or the girl with the smile. He wrote about his obsession, his delusion that she reciprocated his feelings. And he wrote about what he'd done, though never explicitly, always in coded language that revealed and concealed simultaneously. In 2014, a construction crew began clearing land for a housing development 43 miles from Whitmore. On April 18th, a backhoe operator hit something that wasn't dirt or rock. He stopped the machine, climbed down, and found fabric partially buried about 3 feet underground. He called his supervisor, who called the police, and by afternoon, forensic anthropologists from the University of Vermont were carefully excavating what would turn out to be human remains. Near the remains, they found a canvas messenger bag, a Polaroid photograph, and a gold necklace with a sunflower pendant. After 18 years, Emma Whitmore had been found. Detective Warren Reynolds arrived at the excavation site at 10 a.m. on April 19, 2014. He'd received the call an hour earlier. Human remains discovered. Possible connection to cold case. Reynolds had worked enough recoveries to keep his expectations measured. But something about this one felt significant even before he saw the sunflower pendant resting on a tarp beside the partially skeletonized remains. He'd seen that necklace before, in photographs from Emma Whitmore's apartment. She'd worn it every day, a gift from her grandmother. Reynolds felt his pulse quicken. The forensic anthropology team, led by Dr. Sarah Chen from the University of Vermont, had been working since 7 a.m. The excavation was meticulous, treating the site like an archaeological dig because in many ways it was. 18 years in the ground had taken their toll on Emma's remains, but the cold Vermont soil and burial depth had preserved more than Reynolds expected. The canvas messenger bag was remarkably intact, protected by a plastic bag someone had placed it in before burial. Inside, forensic technicians found Emma's sketchbook, her wallet with driver's license still legible, $43 in cash, and the missing Polaroid photograph. Reynolds held the photograph with gloved hands, studying it through a magnifying glass. It showed the SaveMart parking lot, taken from inside a car. In the center of the image, partially obscured by flash reflection, stood a man wearing a SaveMart employee vest. His face was visible but blurred by motion, as if he'd been turning away when the shutter clicked. His hand extended toward the camera, his body language suggesting he was reaching for the photographer. A name tag was partially visible on the vest. Derek. Reynolds immediately requested Derek Morrison's current address from SaveMart's corporate office. Morrison now lived in Nashua, New Hampshire, working as an assistant manager at Shop and Save. Background check revealed he'd been SaveMart's manager during Emma's disappearance, had moved away shortly after the store closed in 2011. But more importantly, Reynolds had been working on Emma's case using a new investigative technique, genetic genealogy. 6 months earlier, he'd submitted DNA samples from Emma's car to a private lab specializing in building family trees from genetic material. Touch DNA from the passenger side door handle had revealed male genetic material that didn't match Emma or anyone in law enforcement databases. The genetic genealogist, Dr. Helen Torres, had built a family tree using that DNA. She'd uploaded it to GDmatch, traced third and fourth cousins, followed lineages, and in March 2014, she'd identified a possible match, Derek Morrison. Now, with the photograph and the DNA evidence, Reynolds had enough for an arrest warrant. At 6 a.m. on April 21, 2014, Nashua police executed the warrant at Morrison's apartment. Morrison answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking confused and annoyed. When officers identified themselves and stated they were arresting him for the murder of Emma Whitmore, his face went blank. Not surprised, not guilty, just blank as if a switch had flipped. "I didn't kill anyone," Morrison said. But he didn't ask who Emma Whitmore was. Didn't act confused about an 18-year-old case. He simply held out his hands for cuffing. The interrogation at Whitmore Police Station began at noon. Morrison initially declined an attorney. "I don't need one because I didn't do anything," a decision he'd later reverse. But before requesting counsel, he provided several hours of recorded statements that would prove damning. Reynolds laid the Polaroid photograph on the table. Morrison stared at it for 47 seconds of recorded silence. Finally, "I want a lawyer." Morrison's apartment was searched thoroughly. Investigators found the storage unit he'd rented in 1997. Inside were items belonging to Emma, her purple jacket, a hairbrush, student papers, and Morrison's journal. The journal entries revealed everything. His fixation on Emma, his delusional belief she reciprocated his feelings, his plans to ask her out, and entries from October 1996. October 11th. Tomorrow is the teacher's birthday. 24 years old, so young, so perfect. October 13th. I did something terrible. I can't undo it, but I had to. She rejected me. She made me feel small. No one makes me feel small. Morrison was formally charged on April 23rd. Second-degree murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice. The district attorney, Rachel Torres, held a press conference announcing the breakthrough. Patricia Whitmore, 75 years old and in a wheelchair, attended. When Torres announced the arrest, Patricia wept openly. 18 years of anguish finally released. The interrogation of Derek Morrison, conducted over 3 days in April 2014, revealed the full horror of what happened to Emma Whitmore. Morrison's confession, combined with forensic evidence and the journal entries, painted a detailed picture of October 12, 1996. Morrison had been fixated on Emma for 6 months, mistaking her politeness for romantic interest. On the morning of her birthday, he took an unauthorized lunch break and positioned himself in the SaveMart parking lot, waiting for Emma to finish shopping. When she emerged at 7:03 a.m., he approached her near her car. His intentions, Morrison claimed, were innocent. He wanted to wish her happy birthday, maybe ask her to dinner. Nothing sinister. But when Emma politely but firmly rejected him, something inside Morrison snapped. The humiliation of realizing his 6 months of fantasy were based on nothing but a customer being polite to a service worker was unbearable. Reynolds accepted the responsibility. He spent his first week reviewing the file, familiarizing himself with every detail. The case fascinated him. Not the lurid fascination of true crime enthusiasts, but the professional interest of someone who believed every victim deserved justice. The years passed. Patricia and Richard aged rapidly, grief taking its physical toll. Richard died in 2013 from a heart attack, and Patricia would tell anyone who asked that he'd died of a broken heart, that Emma's disappearance had killed him as surely as any physical ailment. Patricia moved into a retirement community, selling the house where Emma had grown up. She died in 2019, 4 years after Emma's case was finally solved. She lived long enough to see Derek Morrison imprisoned, long enough to bury Emma properly, but not long enough to heal from wounds that had bled for 23 years. Jessica's daughter, born in 2002, was named Emma. Patricia cried when she heard, saying she would have loved that. Young Emma would grow up hearing stories about her namesake, about the friend her mother had loved, about the woman who vanished buying flowers, and Derek Morrison, the SaveMart manager who'd murdered Emma and buried her in remote forest, went about his life. He moved to New Hampshire in 2003, took a similar management position at a different grocery chain. He divorced his wife in 2005. She'd finally left him, though she never knew why he'd become so distant, so strange, After 1996, Morrison kept a journal, begun in 1994 and continuing through 2012. He wrote about Emma, though he never used her name. He called her the teacher or the girl with the smile. He wrote about his obsession, his delusion that she reciprocated his feelings. And he wrote about what he'd done, though never explicitly, always in coded language that revealed and concealed simultaneously. In 2014, a construction crew began clearing land for a housing development 43 miles from Whitmore. On April 18th, a backhoe operator hit something that wasn't dirt or rock. He stopped the machine, climbed down, and found fabric partially buried about 3 feet underground. He called his supervisor, who called the police, and by afternoon, forensic anthropologists from the University of Vermont were carefully excavating what would turn out to be human remains. Near the remains, they found a canvas messenger bag, a Polaroid photograph, and a gold necklace with a sunflower pendant. After 18 years, Emma Whitmore had been found. Detective Warren Reynolds arrived at the excavation site at 10 a.m. on April 19, 2014. He'd received the call an hour earlier. Human remains discovered. Possible connection to cold case. Reynolds had worked enough recoveries to keep his expectations measured. But something about this one felt significant, even before he saw the sunflower pendant resting on a tarp beside the partially skeletonized remains. He'd seen that necklace before. In photographs from Emma Whitmore's apartment, she'd worn it every day, a gift from her grandmother. Reynolds felt his pulse quicken. The forensic anthropology team, led by Dr. Sarah Chen from the University of Vermont, had been working since 7 a.m. The excavation was meticulous, treating the site like an archaeological dig, because in many ways it was. 18 years in the ground had taken their toll on Emma's remains, but the cold Vermont soil and burial depth had preserved more than Reynolds expected. The canvas messenger bag was remarkably intact, protected by a plastic bag someone had placed it in before burial. Inside, forensic technicians found Emma's sketchbook, her wallet with driver's license still legible, $43 in cash, and the missing Polaroid photograph. Reynolds held the photograph with gloved hands, studying it through a magnifying glass. It showed the SaveMart parking lot, taken from inside a car. In the center of the image, partially obscured by flash reflection, stood a man wearing a SaveMart employee vest. His face was visible but blurred by motion, as if he'd been turning away when the shutter clicked. His hand extended toward the camera, his body language suggesting he was reaching for the photographer. A name tag was partially visible on the vest. Derek. Reynolds immediately requested Derek Morrison's current address from SaveMart's corporate office. Morrison now lived in Nashua, New Hampshire, working as an assistant manager at Shop and Save. Background check revealed he'd been SaveMart's manager during Emma's disappearance, had moved away shortly after the store closed in 2011. But more importantly, Reynolds had been working on Emma's case using a new investigative technique, genetic genealogy. 6 months earlier, he'd submitted DNA samples from Emma's car to a private lab specializing in building family trees from genetic material. Touch DNA from the passenger side door handle had revealed male genetic material that didn't match Emma or anyone in law enforcement databases. The genetic genealogist, Dr. Helen Torres, had built a family tree using that DNA. She'd uploaded it to GEDmatch, traced third and fourth cousins, followed lineages, and in March 2014, she'd identified a possible match, Derek Morrison. Now, with the photograph and the DNA evidence, Reynolds had enough for an arrest warrant. At 6 a.m. on April 21, 2014, Nashua police executed the warrant at Morrison's apartment. Morrison answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking confused and annoyed. When officers identified themselves and stated they were arresting him for the murder of Emma Whitmore, his face went blank. Not surprised. Not guilty. Just blank, as if a switch had flipped. "I didn't kill anyone," Morrison said. But he didn't ask who Emma Whitmore was. Didn't act confused about an 18-year-old case. He simply held out his hands for cuffing. The interrogation at Whitmore Police Station began at noon. Morrison initially declined an attorney. "I don't need one because I didn't do anything," a decision he'd later reverse. But before requesting counsel, he provided several hours of recorded statements that would prove damning. Reynolds laid the Polaroid photograph on the table. Morrison stared at it for 47 seconds of recorded silence. Finally, "I want a lawyer." Morrison's apartment was searched thoroughly. Investigators found the storage unit he'd rented in 1997. Inside were items belonging to Emma, her purple jacket, a hairbrush, student papers, and Morrison's journal. The journal entries revealed everything. his fixation on Emma, his delusional belief she reciprocated his feelings, his plans to ask her out, and entries from October 1996, October 11th. Tomorrow is the teacher's birthday. 24 years old, so young, so perfect. October 13th. I did something terrible. I can't undo it, but I had to. She rejected me. She made me feel small. No one makes me feel small. Morrison was formally charged on April 23rd. Second-degree murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice. The district attorney, Rachel Torres, held a press conference announcing the breakthrough. Patricia Whitmore, 75 years old and in a wheelchair, attended. When Torres announced the arrest, Patricia wept openly. 18 years of anguish finally released. The interrogation of Derek Morrison, conducted over 3 days in April 2014, revealed the full horror of what happened to Emma Whitmore. Morrison's confession, combined with forensic evidence and the journal entries, painted a detailed picture of October 12, 1996. Morrison had been fixated on Emma for 6 months, mistaking her politeness for romantic interest. On the morning of her birthday, he took an unauthorized lunch break and positioned himself in the SaveMart parking lot, waiting for Emma to finish shopping. When she emerged at 7:03 a.m., he approached her near her car. His intentions, Morrison claimed, were innocent. He wanted to wish her happy birthday, maybe ask her to dinner, nothing sinister. But when Emma politely but firmly rejected him, something inside Morrison snapped. The humiliation of realizing his 6 months of fantasy were based on nothing but a customer being polite to a service worker was unbearable. He grabbed Emma's arm. She pulled away and reached for her Polaroid camera, instinctively documenting the threat. The flash went off. Morrison saw the photograph ejecting and understood immediately what it meant. Evidence. He snatched the Polaroid from her hand, but Emma was already screaming, already trying to escape. Morrison panicked. He covered her mouth, pulled her toward his car, told her he just wanted to talk somewhere private, promised he wouldn't hurt her. Emma fought, but Morrison was stronger, and desperation made him brutal. He forced her into his passenger seat, activated the child locks, and drove. Morrison had no plan, no destination, no clear thought beyond getting Emma away from the parking lot before someone saw them. He drove aimlessly at first, eventually heading toward the Green Mountain National Forest on a logging road he knew from hunting trips. Emma tried reasoning with him. "Derek, I know you're scared," she said, using his name, trying to create human connection. "But every second you keep driving makes this worse. Turn around now, let me go. I'll tell police it was a misunderstanding." But Morrison was beyond reason. Each mile driven was another crime committed. Each minute that passed made turning back more impossible. By the time he stopped on a remote forest road, 45 minutes had passed since leaving SaveMart. Morrison sat in his car, hands on the steering wheel, trying to figure out how to fix what couldn't be fixed. "Why are you doing this?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite obvious fear. "I have students who need me. I have parents who love me. Please don't hurt me." Morrison's confession, delivered in a flat monotone to Detective Reynolds, described what happened next. "I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted her to understand. But she kept saying she'd report me, that I'd go to prison. I realized there was no way forward where I didn't lose everything. Either I went to prison for kidnapping or I killed her and maybe got away with it." He strangled her with his bare hands. Emma fought initially, scratching his face, drawing blood. But Morrison was stronger and he didn't let go. It took several minutes, long enough that Morrison would later say the worst part wasn't the killing itself, but the waiting. Holding Emma's throat while she slowly lost consciousness, while her struggles weakened, while her eyes lost focus. When Emma stopped breathing, Morrison sat in the dirt and cried. Not from remorse, the forensic psychologist would later determine, but from self-pity. He'd destroyed his life for nothing. All because he couldn't handle rejection from a woman who'd never been interested in him. Morrison buried Emma carefully, methodically. He'd brought a tarp from his car trunk, wrapped her body, and spent 3 hours digging a grave deep enough that animals wouldn't disturb it. He kept her messenger bag as a trophy, along with the Polaroid photograph that showed him approaching her car, his hand extended, his face captured forever as the face of her killer. Then he drove back to SaveMart, arriving around 11 a.m. His 3-hour lunch break had gone unnoticed. As manager, no one questioned his absence. He went about the rest of his shift as normally as possible, answering police questions later that day about Emma's abandoned car with appropriate concern and no indication of guilt. For 18 years, Morrison lived with what he'd done. He kept Emma's belongings in a storage unit, visiting occasionally, touching her jacket, reading her student papers, maintaining some strange connection to the woman he'd murdered. His journal revealed a fractured psyche, someone who'd created alternate narratives where Emma had loved him, where what happened in the parking lot had been mutual, where he was victim rather than perpetrator. On October 10th, 2014, facing overwhelming evidence and no viable defense, Morrison's attorney requested a meeting with the district attorney. Morrison wanted to plead guilty in exchange for life without parole rather than risk a trial that might result in harsher federal charges. Rachel Torres consulted Patricia Whitmore before deciding. Patricia said simply, "I just want it to be over. I want him to admit what he did." On October 23, 2014, Derek Morrison stood before Judge Harold Stevens and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. His statement was brief, emotionless, delivered in a whisper barely audible in the courtroom. "I killed Emma Whitmore on October 12, 1996. I approached her in the SaveMart parking lot. She rejected me. I took her to the woods and strangled her. Then I buried her body and tried to forget it happened." Judge Stevens sentenced Morrison to life in prison without possibility of parole, 3 consecutive life sentences. His statement was pointed. "You stole Emma Whitmore's future. You destroyed her family. You traumatized a community. And you waited 18 years to admit your guilt. There is no punishment sufficient for what you've done, but I can ensure you never harm anyone else." Derek Morrison was transferred to Northern State Correctional Facility. He would spend the rest of his life in a 6-by-8-foot cell, and everyone would know exactly what he was. A murderer who'd stolen a young woman's life because his ego couldn't handle hearing no. Emma's funeral took place on November 7, 2014, 18 years after her death. The service was held at Burlington's largest church, packed to capacity with mourners who'd never stopped grieving. Patricia Whitmore sat in the front row, flanked by Michael, Emma's brother, and Jessica, her best friend. The casket was closed. Time had taken too much for viewing to be appropriate, but it was draped with sunflowers, dozens of them, creating a cascade of yellow that seemed both celebratory and heartbreaking. The service focused on Emma's life rather than her death. Former students, now adults, shared memories of a teacher who'd made learning magical. Sarah Chen spoke about their friendship. Dr. Margaret Lawson read a letter Emma had written during her first year teaching, expressing gratitude for working with children. Michael gave a brief eulogy. "Emma was my big sister. She taught me how to read before kindergarten. She defended me against bullies. She called me every week during college. I was 21 when she disappeared. I'm 39 now. For 18 years, I've lived in a world without her, and I can tell you, the world is dimmer without Emma in it." The burial followed at Greenwood Cemetery, overlooking Lake Champlain. Emma's grave was in the family plot, between her father Richard and a space reserved for Patricia. The headstone read, "Emma Catherine Whitmore, 1972-1996. She dwelt with beauty, beauty that must die." As the casket lowered into the ground, Patricia threw a single sunflower onto the mahogany surface. Jessica did the same. Michael followed. One by one, mourners filed past, each adding flowers until Emma's casket disappeared beneath yellow blooms. Detective Warren Reynolds attended, standing at the back, feeling proud of solving the case but heartbroken that 18 years had passed before Emma could receive proper burial. The media coverage was extensive. Emma became a symbol of persistence, proof that justice delayed didn't mean justice denied. But for Patricia, the resolution brought complex emotions. In an interview a week after the funeral, she tried to articulate what she felt. "I'm grateful Derek Morrison is in prison. I'm grateful Emma can rest properly. But grateful doesn't mean happy. Justice was served, but justice doesn't resurrect the dead. Emma should be 42 years old. She should have married, had children, become a principal. She should be here, living her life. Justice doesn't give me back what I lost." Derek Morrison remained incarcerated, refusing all interview requests. As of 2025, he's 70 years old, serving the 11th year of his life sentence. He'll die in prison, having lost everything for the moment when he wrapped his hands around Emma Whitmore's throat. The question of why, the fundamental question that haunts every senseless crime, has never been adequately answered. Morrison's journal suggests delusion and rejection, an inability to accept that kindness was just kindness. But no explanation suffices. No psychological profile makes sense of why a 44-year-old man murdered a 24-year-old woman whose only crime was being polite. The SaveMart location became a memorial site, though it's now a pharmacy. People leave flowers in the parking lot where Emma's car was found. The town installed a plaque, in memory of Emma Whitmore. May she rest in peace. Riverside Elementary's memorial plaque was updated, transforming it from missing person memorial to proper tribute. An annual Emma Whitmore Memorial Scholarship supports students planning to become teachers. Jessica wrote a memoir, The Birthday That Never Was, remembering Emma Whitmore, donating all proceeds to organizations supporting families of murder victims. Emma's impact persists in ways she never could have imagined. Her students became teachers themselves, inspired by her example. They tell their own students about a teacher they had in second grade, whose life was stolen but whose influence persisted. Patricia Whitmore died in 2019, 4 years after Emma's case was solved. She lived long enough to see Morrison imprisoned, long enough to bury Emma properly, but the broken heart never fully healed. She was buried beside Emma and Richard in Greenwood Cemetery. Her headstone included an epitaph she'd chosen. Beloved mother and wife, reunited with those she loved most. 28 years after Emma Whitmore bought sunflowers for her birthday party, her legacy continues in ways both visible and subtle. The Emma Whitmore Memorial Garden at Riverside Elementary blooms each spring with sunflowers maintained by students who never knew her, but honor her memory. The scholarship bearing her name has sent 43 students to college to become teachers, each one carrying forward the profession Emma loved. Jessica's daughter Emma, now 22, is student teaching at an elementary school in Boston. She chose education because of stories about her namesake, about the friend her mother loved, about the woman who made second grade magical for 21 students in 1996. Michael Whitmore, now 51, rarely returns to Vermont. The memories are too painful, but he carries Emma with him, in the way he interacts with his own children, in his insistence on kindness even when it's inconvenient, in his refusal to take any day for granted because he learned at 21 that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. The students Emma taught are 43 years old now. Many became teachers themselves. Tommy teaches high school English and keeps Emma's photograph in his classroom. Sarah works as a school counselor, specializing in trauma. Marcus became an occupational therapist, helping children who struggle in traditional settings. All because one woman, during one school year, showed them what compassionate education looked like. Derek Morrison remains in prison, forgotten except as the answer to, who killed Emma Whitmore? His name fades from memory while Emma's grows stronger. Proof that victims define their own legacy, not the people who hurt them. Emma Whitmore was 24 years old when she died. She taught for 2 years. But those 2 years created ripples that extended across decades, touching lives she never met, inspiring choices she never witnessed, changing the world in ways both large and small. She deserved so much more than she received. She deserved to celebrate her 24th birthday. She deserved to continue teaching children who loved her. She deserved to find love, build a family, grow old with grace. Instead, she's buried in Greenwood Cemetery, forever 24. Her potential unrealized. But her legacy, the students she taught, the friends she loved, the example she set, that legacy persists. And in that persistence, Emma Whitmore continues teaching all of us about kindness, about dedication, about the importance of remembering that victims are people, not just entries in crime statistics. 28 years after buying sunflowers, Emma's influence blooms eternal. Subscribe to this channel for more cold case investigations where justice was finally served. Every case matters. Every victim deserves to be remembered. Like this video if you believe persistence in seeking justice matters, even decades later. Comment below. Which cold case would you like me to cover next? Thank you for watching, for caring, and for remembering that behind every cold case is a real person who mattered to real people. Emma Whitmore mattered. Justice was served. Her legacy continues.